if we're going to have a more effective movement this time around, it's really got to be focused on pro-democracy, pro-civic engagement, and pro-voting. We can't shy away from that.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to UUSF Forum on this stormy atmospheric river kind of Sunday. Thanks for coming out. I do want to mention that we actually have a little bit of the rain indoors here. There's a little bit of dripping going on over here, and I do want to especially mention this from a safety perspective in case you decide to come up and ask a question from the microphone. Just be conscious of the fact that this floor might be a little slippery over here. Right. So this is the UUSF Forum, and I am Jeff Peckrell. I'm the leader of Forum, and I'm also part of the Human Rights Working Group, which does the programming for Forum. Today's presentation is actually a co-presentation with the Women's Rights Working Group, and they arranged for our speaker today, Christian Garcia, who I'll introduce more formally in a minute or two here. Just by way of logistics, everyone can see that we have a nice breakfast for you over here, provided by Melvin Starks, another leader of the Human Rights Working Group and Forum. And yes, it's delicious, isn't it? I enjoy that. Also want to mention upcoming things. We hope you'll be back next Sunday when we'll have Barbara Friedenbach from the Homeless Coalition speaking here. The Sunday after that, in honor of Black African-American History Month, we have a speaker yet to be determined, but it'll be on the topic of the African-American experience in the United States. The weekend after, Sunday after that, we will have someone from the American Friends Service Committee here talking about police militarizations and some of the issues that we have around that. One more logistic thing, like our speaker would like to do the Q&A towards the end of the talk, so you'll find cards on the tables and some of the chairs and pens and stuff. Please jot your questions down there. And if you are on Zoom today, I'll be monitoring the chat for questions that you have from Zoom. And we'll bring them up also at the end. So we'll have our speakers up until around 10:30, and then we'll have Q&A for about 15 minutes after that. And we'll end the meeting at 10:45. Okay, at this time, I'd like to do our Ohlone land recognition, and this is just to say that we are on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land here in San Francisco, and we have gratitude for those people that have allowed us to continue using their land, so thank you for that, Ohlone and Ramaytush people. With that, I'd like to now introduce our speaker. We have Christian Garcia, and Christian was born and raised in a farm labor camp in Watsonville, California, not too far from here, which might be where our delicious strawberries that we are eating today might have come from, right? He is the first of his family to graduate from college. Christian is Vice President of Government Relations and Communications at Planned Parenthood of Northern California. He has over a decade of experience working on many projects, including cities, healthcare districts, school districts, candidates, statewide propositions, community health issues, and other causes. Christian is committed to working with others who are passionate about people and making changes that provide them with a more equal voice in their communities. He is a graduate of CSU Chico with a double major in Poli-Sci and Latin American Studies, and he has a master's in public affairs from the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. And he's going to speak to us today about reproductive justice. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Christian Garcia.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for making the trip out here during this atmospheric river and listening to this important topic that we're going to be talking about today that I think a lot of people are hearing from day to day. You're seeing it in the news, you're reading it in the papers, your friends are telling you about it. And I think it's important to just understand what's truly happening, what's really at stake here. I'm really privileged to be able to talk about this issue as being a man. And I think it's important that more men get involved in this movement. It's not just, it's a man-made issue. Men created laws and said that women don't have control of their bodies. So now men need to get involved and say, no, we are here to be allies and we are here to change that. And so I'm really privileged of being able to do that. A little bit about myself and my background, as it was mentioned in my introduction, I was born in Watsonville, and my parents were farm workers. You know, they came from Mexico, got to Watsonville. They picked strawberries, raspberries, whatever was in season. And me and my brothers were fortunate enough to join them in that and learn during these formative years what hard work looked like. And I mentioned that because that was the first time that I interacted with Planned Parenthood, was being a young farm working kid. They were our primary care provider, you know, and I never looked at them or thought of them as a reproductive health care clinic. It was a place that I went to when I had a flu. It was a place that I went to when my parents needed medical attention or my siblings. And so Planned Parenthood does a lot more than just abortion care. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. And so if we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the different layer cakes about Planned Parenthood. I think a lot of people just think about Planned Parenthood as this national organization, but there's a couple layer cakes that go into it, and I'll get into that. I'm going to talk a little bit about our affiliate, what we do at Planned Parenthood Northern California, who we serve, and the kind of services that we offer. Then we'll talk about what is the current landscape for reproductive health care, what's happening nationally, and begin to connect the dots for you in terms of what has come down the pipeline since 2022 and the overturn of Roe. Then we're going to talk about California and how we are a reproductive freedom state, but also what are some of the challenges that we currently have in place. And even though we're California and we're in this bubble, there's still a lot of things that could go away if these elections don't go the way we need them to. And then we'll talk a little bit about moving forward, ways that you all can help and how you can spread the word about what we're doing. So layer cakes of Planned Parenthood. Next slide. So we have the Planned Parenthood Federation. That's the national one. That's the one you see everywhere. Everybody talks about it. Maybe some of you who give to Planned Parenthood, you're writing checks to Planned Parenthood Federation. And to make it clear, what they do is they build national relationships in DC to make sure that they are our voice there, that they're advocating for issues there. They promote healthcare services across the nation, but they do not provide services themselves. They do not operate healthcare clinics. They just help us get the word out there. They help us build websites so that patients are able to make their appointments and whatnot. And then they provide support to our individual staffs at the local level, whether that's marketing support, whether that's ways to promote services, if that's ways to improve the experience of a patient. That's all coming from the Federation. When you give to the Federation, you know, money trickles down and we get a portion of it, but we don't get as much as when you give directly to the local affiliate. And then in California, we have Planned Parenthood Affiliates of California that is based in Sacramento, and they are our lobbying arm. They are the people we go to when we need the governor's attention, when we need the state Senate, the state assembly to move on certain legislative bills. And so they work on behalf of the 7 affiliates across California. And so they're very important to us in terms of what we do statewide. Next. And then here are these 7 affiliates that make up the California health services for Planned Parenthood. Northern California is the most northern one, and that's who I work for. There's Mar Monte, and they have everything from Alameda County down to Bakersfield, and also what's not on here is part of the state of Nevada. And then there's California Central Coast, Ventura, Santa Barbara, Orange, and San Bernardino. Los Angeles is its own, and then Pacific Southwest. And everybody operates anywhere between, Mar Monte probably has the most. They have about, I want to say about 40 to 50 health centers. We have 17. And then they vary by location. Next slide. So about Planned Parenthood Northern California. So next slide. We have 20 Northern California counties. We basically go from San Francisco, Contra Costa County, all the way to the Oregon border. We have 17 health centers. We have a telehealth department that has become very essential for our rural patients. Roughly, we're at 415 employees, although I heard on Friday we're about 460 now because we're really ramping up and getting more people into our rural health centers. And we serve about 87,000 patients a year. And some of these patients are repeat patients, so we might see them 2 or 3 times a year. So that accounts for about 149,000 visits from patients across our region. Next slide. And then here's a little bit more closer. You can see our Eureka Health Center. We see about 9,000 patients a year. Reading, 6,500. Clear Lake, about 1,700. Ukiah, 2,700 plus or minus. Santa Rosa, close to 9,000. Chico, about 11,000 patients. So you can see kind of Chico, there's that big rural buffer in between. And so a lot of patients are coming there because we're probably the only healthcare provider that provides reproductive healthcare services in that area. Next. And then here's our inner bay, San Rafael, El Cerrito, San Francisco, where we see a lot of patients, about 16, almost 17,000. Walnut Creek and then San Ramon. Next slide. And then the Central Bay, Vallejo, Napa, Fairfield, Antioch, Hilltop, Concord. Next slide. And then here are some of the services we offer. Obviously, family planning and contraception, STI testing and treatment. And that's a big one. When I look at our numbers, abortion services is about 3% of what we do. The vast majority, about 60 to 67%, is STI testing and treatment. Those of you that don't know this, there's a big syphilis outbreak in California over the last 2 years. And so that's the biggest thing that we're battling, especially in those rural communities, making sure that there's education, that they know where to come to get those treatments. For men, vasectomies are becoming really popular since Roe got overturned. And so we now have a 6-month wait for people to get those vasectomies. But it's really interesting to see that uptick. And then on top of that, we also offer gender affirming hormone therapy, which has also been really important for our rural communities because a lot of patients that are going through that gender affirming care, they don't have a healthcare provider. They have to get telehealth support. Their nearest health center might be 2 to 3 hours away. So it's very important that we provide those. Next. Who we serve, 84% of our patients are uninsured or they use some sort of public healthcare insurance. 83% are women and non-binary. 82% are low income. 73% are between the ages of 18 and 34. 56% are from communities of color. 47% are from Latino Hispanic community. And 43% are from the LGBTQI+ community. So what's happening nationally? So as you all know, once Roe got overturned, 13 states had trigger bans, which basically meant the moment the Supreme Court said that there's no more federal protection for abortion services, these laws went into effect from one night to the next in these 13 states. To date, there are 34 states that have eliminated or severely restricted healthcare services, reproductive healthcare services. And you can see those from red being the most restrictive to orange and yellow being somewhat restrictive. But it's making it more and more difficult for women to be able to access the services that they need. One of the things that my staff has been telling me as we're meeting more and more youth, a lot of students that are beginning to graduate from high school and go into college are now looking at maps like this and deciding, well, I don't want to go to that state for school because I'm not going to have the services that I need as a woman in that state. So it's becoming a reality in terms of where people are going to college. Next slide. There's a lot of questions that we get in terms of how many abortions or how many people are coming from out of state to get an abortion. And so these numbers kind of go back and forth, but the Guttmacher Institute did do a study last summer. In California, we have seen about a 17% increase. And so plus or minus, we're seeing a little bit close to like 4,500 people that are coming in for those services. Now, I say these numbers change because what we're seeing in our health center is those people that come from out of state are not going to tell us that they're here from Texas or Arizona. They're using a California address. They're using an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, a relative that allows them to use that address. So it's very difficult. Sometimes we will get we do know we get about an average of 14 out-of-state abortions. Those are people who are specifically tell us, I'm here for the day. How can you get this done for me? And we always encourage them to stay overnight because we want to monitor their process. But we are seeing those numbers go up. And I think most recently, the San Francisco Chronicle did an article, I would say maybe within the last 2 weeks, and their numbers are about 12 to 15%. Next slide. The other thing that we're seeing is just training for the profession, OBGYNs. If you look at where OBGYNs get their training, it's a lot of them are in the South, in Texas, the Midwest area. And so if we go back to that other map, we don't have to, I'm just saying, if we go back to that other map where we see where the restrictions are, they fall in those places where these students are getting their OBGYN training or just how to provide reproductive healthcare services. So that's having a big impact. A lot of students are now deciding not to even go into the profession. So it's going to create a huge domino effect in terms of getting trained professionals to do this kind of work a decade from now. But I'll talk about how we're combating that. Next slide. The other thing that you probably have heard a lot about is mifepristone, which is one of the abortion pills that's provided during a medicated abortion. One of two, it's mifepristone and misoprostol. A judge out of Amarillo, Texas, Judge Kaczmarek, who was appointed by Trump during his presidency, has kind of opened up his court to allow anti-reproductive freedom advocates to come there and pass any kind of lawsuit that they want. And he keeps moving them up to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal. And so this is how Miffy got started. This is a medication that was approved by the FDA back in 2000. It's been in circulation for close to 23 years now. And so this case not only puts women at risk, but it also puts the FDA at risk, because if the Supreme Court, which will make a decision sometime this spring, if they side with the anti-reproductive freedom advocates, then that puts all our medication at risk. That allows people to then say, well, if mifepristone isn't safe, then was the COVID vaccine safe? Was every other medication that was approved by the FDA safe? So it does take a big hit in terms of the integrity of the FDA as an organization. So there's a lot to watch here in this case. At Planned Parenthood in Northern California, we are prepared if Miffy is taken out by the Supreme Court. We're going to pivot to misoprostol only. Misoprostol is still very effective. It's still very safe. It's about 98% safe. And it's the medication that is used around the world for medicated abortion. So I do want you all to know that. I've seen different articles kind of circulate in the media saying that it's not as effective and that it's not as safe, but it is. There are other benefits too to mifepristone. For women who have heavy periods and whatnot, it helps them with cramping. So there's a lot more benefits to it than just medicated abortion. But these anti-reproductive freedom advocates are using it as a way to make it a bigger issue than it actually is. Next slide. The other thing that we're dealing with nationally is that in the same court, an organization is using the False Claims Act. And the False Claims Act is basically saying that any citizen could, if you feel like there's a healthcare entity that is misusing state or federal dollars, that they're not really using it as in the way that they're saying that they're using it, then you can report this as Medicare fraud. And so these anti-reproductive freedom advocates are saying that Planned Parenthood in Texas and in Louisiana, that we committed fraud, that the money that was coming from the federal government and from the state for Medi-Cal patients should not have gone to reproductive healthcare services. It's a little out there. But it's making its way again through Judge Kaczmarek's court. And we are waiting to see what happens there. If the courts do side with this group, then basically it puts Planned Parenthood out of work because they're asking for $1.8 billion in fees, in legal fees to get back. And so we're closely watching this, but we plan to still continue to be intact. But there's a lot of conversations around there. But I also want you all to be aware about this case and what's happening. And the fact that there's, Planned Parenthood has always been under attack, but now, given this judge and given what's happening nationally, there's momentum there to really take these services away. Next slide. The other thing that we're seeing nationally is attacks on gender affirming care. And so if you look at, these are the states, there's 22 of them that have already banned services or doctors from being able to provide any kind of puberty blockers, hormone therapy, or gender affirming surgery to youth or to people who are going through the process of changing their sex. And so for us, this is a big issue because, again, we're supportive of people who want to go through gender affirming care. We have the care to provide to them. And it's something that, again, it's another attack on another community from these anti-reproductive freedom advocates. Next slide. And you can see there the same states that are attacking women's healthcare services are also attacking these services for gender affirming care and the LGBTQ plus community. Shortly after Roe, there's a couple of things that we looked at, and we had some national challenges. The landscape was just constantly changing. We didn't know what was going to happen. We were unsure. The capacity to meet demand, really, in California, we were trying to figure out how do we make it accessible to those patients coming from out of state. There was legal uncertainty. Our clinicians and our nurses were very concerned that they would lose their licenses from retaliatory states. There was also uncertainty from patients. Would they go to jail? Would they get sued if they came to California or some states that were protective? And then also, how would this look like enforcing these laws across state lines? So there were some national challenges. And then in California, there was also challenges in terms of, would there be civil cases, criminal law cases, professional liability cases against our staff and against our patients? What would enrollment look like for our providers? Would people choose to not want to do this profession, pull out of it because of the risk and the legal uncertainty? Our workforce also, patients were coming in, so we needed to figure out how do we keep hours operational? How do we make ourselves accessible? Do we go to 6 days a week, 7 days a week to make sure that we have that? And are we providing the resources our workforce needs to maintain themselves through this moment? Making sure the licenses weren't being revoked, making sure our telehealth department was amped up to be able to help those patients that maybe didn't need to go into the clinic to make space for people coming from out of state, and they could still get the medical services they needed through telehealth, privacy protections and security of patients. So these were all the challenges that we looked at from a policy and legal perspective. And in California, we were very fortunate to have a proactive governor, proactive legislator, both in the state Senate and the Assembly, who the moment this got pulled, they moved on it. And so one of the first things that we did, next slide, was go back and we looked at this law that was passed in 2002, which codifies the constitutional principles of Roe v. Wade, making sure that people had the right to choose or refuse abortion control or birth control and obtain abortion when they wanted it and as they needed it. Next slide. So one of the first things that we did in September, and this is when we began to feel the winds change and that we knew that the administration was going to go after this Dobbs decision was making its way through the courts. There was what was called the Future of Abortion Council that was created in September of 2021. 51 organizations were a part of that, 270 individuals. And we started putting our heads together and figuring out some of the solutions to those challenges that I mentioned before. How do we protect workforce? How do we protect people from losing licenses? How do we keep people motivated through these difficult times? And so as a result of the works of the work from the council, the governor, that legislative year in 2022 signed 13 bills that allowed us to address some of those issues. And we were also able to put Proposition 1 on the ballot. And we thank all of you for voting yes on that proposition because it was 66.9% of the vote, a lot more than we needed. We only needed 50% plus one, but it showed that the vast majority of voters were in line with reproductive health care services. And that same number is what you see across the nation. Whenever this issue is put on the ballot, the vast majority of voters agree that this is an important issue. Next slide. So in 2022, some of those bills that I mentioned about was cost barriers. We wanted to make sure that our patients didn't have any issues being able to get the services they need. So the state did establish some funds that allowed us to provide uncompensated care. So if somebody came in and they didn't have 20 or 30 bucks, didn't matter. We'll take care of your services. It's all free of charge. But that was thanks to the state legislator protecting workforce, making sure that there was training programs in place, that people had the support that they needed, legal protections, making sure that nobody was losing their license, that if there was a civil case, that provider didn't need to take time away, that the state would be there to support them through that time. And then just health equity, making sure that communities of color, low income, Medi-Cal recipients were getting the services that they needed. Next one. And then in 2023, we continued with another onslaught of legislative bills, privacy, making sure that if a patient came to California in their medical record, there was a protection so that when they went back and saw their primary care provider in Texas, that person didn't report the services that they received here. And so we want to, the same way you have privacy protections on your phone, we want to have that for our patients and their medical records. Shield loss to make sure that our clinics and our hospitals also had these safeguards in place so that they weren't losing services. Service coverages so that if there was some loony kind of lawsuit that was brought forward, and that we could still continue to operate while this was being fought for throughout the courts. Sorry there. And then we had workforce protections. I mentioned OBGYNs and getting doctors trained in some of these areas where they weren't allowed to. So now we have a rotation program where students can come from out of state to California, get their training, and go back to their states. And that's really thanks to the legislator. And it's also, they still receive their accreditation through that. So it's all done in accordance to what they need required to keep their license. And then more health education, making sure that people are really aware about the services that are being offered throughout, not just Planned Parenthood, but other healthcare providers who do similar work. The other thing that we did locally is we launched the Secure Abortion Freedom Equality, the SAFE campaign, which was a local effort from local donors to raise about $5.8 million to, again, make sure that patients didn't have any barriers for cost, to be able to partner with rideshare services. So if there were patients who didn't have the family support to get to a health center, we would get their travel covered for them. Also making sure that, if people needed childcare, maybe there's some patients who have kids and they can't find a babysitter, we would support with that. And so we appreciate our donors for helping us reach this goal. As of this year, we're at $3.2 million raised. And we still have through the end of this fiscal year to reach our goal of 5.8 million. But this has been really helpful, and it's made a huge difference for a lot of our patients, especially in those rural communities. So moving forward, what we know is that Roe wasn't enough. Roe in name really helped protect abortion services, but there was a long wait time for patients to get the services that they needed. It didn't help in communities of color. There was still not the services that they needed there. The money wasn't there to support it. So the name of protecting abortions was there in name, but when you pulled the hood back, there's a lot of problems there. And so moving forward, we need to be better. We're going to fight to make sure that we get something back into the Constitution, but it's got to be something that's going to be inclusive of everybody in all communities and all walks of life. Next slide. We also know that the overturn of Roe was a direct result of election outcomes. There should be no surprise there. We knew that the moment that Roe got passed, 50 odd years ago, the other side was working. They were getting people ready. They were getting lawyers ready. They were getting judges ready. And so if we're going to have a more effective movement this time around, it's really got to be focused on pro-democracy, pro-civic engagement, and pro-voting. We can't shy away from that. And so that's part of the reason that I joined a year ago, is because my expertise is that. My expertise is bringing people together, getting people excited about elections. And I think we need that here in this movement. It can't just be women. It's got to be men. It can't just be women who fought in the movement, 50 years ago. It's got to be people who are young at heart, but also people who are young who need to understand that, hey, this movement is cross-generational and it's going to be here for the long run. And we got to learn from those that have been there before. Next slide. A couple of things that we're working on and that you can do. We are launching a voter education project all across Northern California. We're going to be phone banking and calling young voters under 45 and encouraging them to return their ballot. That's it. We're not going to talk about who to vote for. We're not going to get into the politics of it. We just want you to vote. We need you to submit your ballot, because if we get them to build that habit of voting, they're going to do it again and again and again, right? Voting is a habit. And I think that's the most important thing that we need to remember. So we could definitely use your support making some calls. We can set you up at home. We'll send you a list and you can make calls to a handful of voters. You can call to people in your neighborhood, or we can give you a list of in another community that you want to call into. We also will have phone banks down the street. Our health center is on Bush. If you haven't been there, it's a very beautiful health center. And we have a community space where we're going to have phones and tables and chairs and kind of the old school way, right? Pizza and list and pencils. I still think that's very effective. While digital campaigns have kind of taken momentum since the Obama election, I still believe that direct person-to-person contact, having someone call you, has a bigger impact than a digital ad or a text message that you receive. Decreasing abortion stigma is the other one. I think a lot of people have had or know somebody who has had an abortion. I actually was at dinner last night with my wife and our friends, and they've now had an abortion and a miscarriage. And so we've talked about that. And, even being as young as I am, nobody prepares you for that. No one tells you about that. My parents never talked to us about it. And so we're sitting there as friends, feeling comfortable with one another and just talking about our challenges of just getting pregnant. And I think that's a lot of things. Sometimes it's taboo. We don't want to go there. We don't want to talk about it. But the moment that you begin to do that, you make it normalized. You allow people to feel like they have a voice. And so I encourage all of you to share those stories, and get comfortable with it, because that's the only way we're going to overcome this. We also have our volunteer programs, the Clergy for Reproductive Freedom, which some of you here are members of. We really believe that getting more clergy involved and congregations involved is important. There's volunteer opportunities where you can come and table with us. We have our Pride event where you can march with us, and things like this phone bank. So I encourage all of you to sign up to become one of our super supporters. And if you just want to stay in the loop, you just want to know what's happening statewide or nationally, we want to be that source for you of reliable information. Next. The other thing too is, our healthcare providers, our nurses, our nurse practitioners, our front desk people, they're dealing with a lot right now. And so if you want to write a note of gratitude to them, just letting, encouraging words, they love those things. And, we post them up in the House Center. So if some of you want to get a small group together and do that, you can send them to our Concord office, or you can drop them off here in the San Francisco location. And I tell you what, it makes a huge difference for these individuals. So we would really appreciate some of those notes of gratitude. And then just follow us on social media. Donations are always welcome. I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't asking for donations. This work really does make a difference when just $25 makes a difference. All those small donations add up. So really encourage you to do that. And on the social media end, just stay connected with us so that you know what's happening. The moment these cases go out or legislative bills are in the process, we like to inform our followers and our volunteers so that they're in the loop. Next one. And that's it. I'll open it up to some questions.
Hi, very outstanding presentation.
Thank you.
I would like to verify where we write a check for local Planned Parenthood. So for us, that would be Planned Parenthood,
Northern California.
Northern California, and that would actually come to the local office. Okay.
Correct.
And then this SAFE organization, it seems like checks should be written to that, and where does that go? Is that
So
national?
if you write a check to Planned Parenthood Northern California, then you just let us know that you wanted to go to the SAFE campaign. It's one of our initiatives that we're fundraising towards right now.
But it would still stay
It still stays
locally?
local. Yes. The
Oh,
SAFE
good.
campaign is local for Planned Parenthood Northern California.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Louise, I think you should make that announcement again with the microphone for people that may not have heard your beautiful voice.
So sweet. So back here on the table, we have what's called the vote, and it has the 4 areas where we can do phone banking in the different communities. That being on Mondays through February would be here in the city. Tuesdays would be in Concord, Wednesdays, Eureka, and Thursdays, Petaluma. But as Christian mentioned, he can set you up also to do things from home. But we also have a sign-up sheet. Some of us have already signed up for the Mondays we are available, and it'll be fun to go as a group as well.
Follow-on question about the donations. Would you recommend that we split our checks between the national entity and one of the local ones, or what would be the most beneficial to the organization?
Local is always best because it does go directly to healthcare services. But those of you who are already giving nationally, that's totally fine too. It's where you want your impact to go to. Yeah.
A quick question. In the early slide where you had the various California regional, there was a color coding of blue and red. And I wasn't clear what that was about.
So I think that's on my end. So in Planned Parenthood, we do have the nonprofit side, and then we have the political C4 side. That's more of an advocacy side. And so what was these should all be in blue, and I think it's just a color coordination thing. So they should all be in blue, but it's just a color thing. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. Or did you have one more?
I'm Meg Whitaker Green, and I am also a UU minister with the Faithful Fools. And I worked my way through Star King School at Planned Parenthood in Oakland, working there. And I'm wondering if you could speak to what's going on in the East Bay and where the offices are now. I'm afraid I've been out of the loop for the most part for some years.
Yeah. So Alameda County is not in my jurisdiction. That's Mar Monte.
I know.
But I know so what I do know is that they have a couple locations. One's down by the DNV off of the Coliseum.
Mhm.
So there's a location there.
Okay.
There's a location in Berkeley. And then we have one in El Cerrito that's operated by PP NorCal.
Oh,
And I'm trying to think where the other one is. I think those are the only ones I know. Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, so there are the same opportunities there.
Correct. There's similar opportunities. And they're all, if you're giving to the East Bay, it would go to Marmonte versus PP NorCal.
Are you also recruiting people who would do intakes?
For patients,
Mhm.
so we don't have that program anymore.
Ah,
The closest you get to patients, for anybody that wants to volunteer, we have a patient escort program. And especially here in San Francisco, we've had in the last 5 months an uptick of anti-reproductive individuals who show up and they yell, they have signs, they don't respect the buffer zone that's there. If you all have ever walked down Bush in front of our health center, there's two clear painted lines that tell people that this is where you can, you First Amendment right over here. But they're now breaking that barrier and coming directly in front of the door. And so our patient escort programs serve as a buffer. And so when a patient comes in, they'll walk them in with our security. So if you wanted to be involved in that, can definitely offer you that. There is no longer, we don't offer volunteers inside the health center, just because of the protection of our patients. And to be honest with you, it's a buffer of protection for us too, legally, given just kind of the uptick of activity that we've seen in the
Right.
last 2 years. These protesters are emboldened, and I think it's no longer just your traditional religious protesters like we had before that were, praying peacefully and whatnot. Now we're seeing bad political actors
Mhm.
who are using this issue as a way to get momentum to advocate for their issues. So it's pretty bad. So I do encourage you, if you have time, come volunteer with us and be a patient escort.
Yeah, it used to be that in Gary, Indiana, and also when I moved here, that we could accompany a patient through the exam so that
Right.
she had someone with her who was her person,
Yeah, and
who is not a medical person, but that's not possible anymore.
not
because
anymore for
the-
volunteers. What we do have now
Okay.
are community health workers who serve the same purpose. And so those community health workers are there to support the patient. If the patient has additional needs, if let's say it's somebody who's unhoused or, maybe they're facing food insecurity, this community health worker will help them connect to the resources they need. So we do provide that full service support.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for being here as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your work and for this presentation. Could you talk a little bit more about the threat overall to Planned Parenthood and where that's coming from and how, where it picks up steam and, where the power is, the control in that, threat?
The threat to Planned Parenthood?
Yeah.
The threat is really coming from all sides. I mean, there's the Christian right, who are very, very passionate about protecting life and whatnot. And again, I kind of categorize everybody under these anti-reproductive freedom individuals. There's also political threats, coming from specific candidates that you all know of. And there's legal, ramifications are coming our way. And so they're coming from all places. I think there's also just people who kind of see this as their moment to be bad actors, to get momentum. And so they're coming to our health centers, they're, going to courts or getting people together. So it's really everywhere. But are you looking for a specific group? Okay.
How can Planned Parenthood survive? Where exactly is the threat, when and where and how is what I'm after. Thank you.
Amarillo, Texas. That's where it's coming from. Amarillo, Texas. Judge Kaczmarek, he has really become the court for the other side. And the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal, which is also based out of Texas, Louisiana, it's the most conservative court. There's only 3 judges on there. Majority of them are appointed by Trump. And that is where the legal threat is coming from. Yes, it goes up to the Supreme Court. Yeah, the threat's going up to the Supreme Court. The other thing that I want to emphasize on that too, the other threats is if people don't turn out to vote, there's major repercussions for that. Because really, I think this time around, we've heard this over and over again since 2016, democracy is at stake, but I really believe it in this election. The difference between democracy and a dictatorship are a few votes away. And even in a California safe state, if the other side gets elected, Proposition 1 goes away, right? Because if there's a national ban on abortion services, on reproductive health care services, we're not even protected here. It's gone. So that is at stake in this election.
I wanted to just revisit the escort program. I think I had the wrong impression. I thought maybe the escort program was a willingness to fly to another state and help someone get on a plane or drive them and then bring them back to your home and then take them into the clinic. Is there any kind of operation going on like that?
There's other groups that are doing some of that work. For us, again, legal liability, we just don't want to put somebody at risk or anything like that. The moment you begin to do that, then you also become part of the issue and somebody takes you to court. So for us, it's more of what can we do to protect our patients locally? So we have the San Francisco Health Center, Walnut Creek, Concord. Those are all places where we are seeing an uptick of these anti-reproductive, protesters who are showing up. Any other questions? Well, I want to leave you on a positive note because I feel like this is such a negative topic, and it's so hard to think about finding hope, silver lining with what I mentioned in terms of these elections. I do believe, though, that when people come together, when groups like you this morning who woke up, went through this storm to be here, listen to this topic, you bring it back to your families, you bring it back to your friends, having those conversations has an impact. And it doesn't feel like it, but 5, 10, 15, 20, 3,000, 4,000, 6,000, a million people, it's how it begins.
He said, let me try.
Being able to get involved in these elections, get your neighbors to vote, that's going to make the difference. And I think we can overcome this. I think that people are beginning to realize that and getting young people involved as well. We know they're busy. We know that young families, young kids are a lot to work with. But it's going to depend on all of us. So get out there, spread the word, and thank you all so much. And I'll take this one last question.
Yeah, this is Larry Danos, and I'm at home. And my question is, I noticed that gender affirming care is sort of partnered with the Planned Parenthood now. It looks like that's a joint thing that wasn't there in the past. It seems like it's a sensible thing, but I'm wondering what effect does that have on Planned Parenthood? Does it make things better or worse, or is there no effect at all about the problems you have with as Planned Parenthood?
I'll try repeating the question. So the question was, is Planned Parenthood's work on affirmative gender care affecting the program? Essentially that.
Not at all. I think it's part of being an inclusive healthcare provider for reproductive healthcare services. It's a part of the umbrella. It does not at all affect us. Does it add another target? Probably, but if we weren't doing it, I think that would be a bigger problem. But we're proud to serve it, to provide it. A lot of our patients, and we've been providing it for years. It's not a new thing. I think it's now getting more recognition in the last 5 to 6 years. There's more awareness now because of the attacks on on non-binary individuals. But it's been there, and we're proud to do it. Great question, by the way.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right.
Just before Jeff wraps it up and Christian wraps it up, I want to thank everyone for coming, and Christian as well. And I wanted to answer a question that was asked about crossing lines and escorting people in different states. Actually, our vote into the sacred, the women's rights group had that, we had the vote after the training. Actually, Daniel Cantor, who came, the pastor from Texas, that is exactly what they were doing. So there, we have a direct connection where we can, if someone is impassioned to do that type of work, we can make connections. And so, yes, there are organizations like Christian mentioned out there. And also, I want to say, and I think this is fantastic, we got our first donation today for Planned Parenthood from someone in the audience, and thank you very much. And I'm sure he'll take more. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I was not planning to walk away with donations today, but thank you so much. This is really, we appreciate it. And you all have a great day. Appreciate being here.
Thank you so much, Christian. And I just want to appreciate what you said about this being a cause for men to engage with too. And, I personally will, and I want to do some of the phone banking. I think we should try to organize that to support Planned Parenthood in this upcoming election cycle.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. So thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
Okay, just by way of wrapping up, I want to invite you all to come back next Sunday. We'll have Barbara Friedenbach from the Homeless Coalition. And 2 weeks from today, we'll be honoring African American History Month. We haven't decided on the speaker yet, but it'll be something good for sure. And 3 weeks from today, we will have a talk on police militarization. So everyone, please come back and stay dry and avoid the puddle over here. Please be careful if you walk over here today, okay? Thank you very much. Sign up for phone banking on your way out.
If we're going to have a more effective movement this time around, it's really got to be focused on pro-democracy, pro-civic engagement, and pro-voting. We can't shy away from that.